pressing record. So hi everyone, thank you for joining Reentry in the Black Church Part 2. We're saying Part 2 because last May we had a conversation following, an announcement from the Trump administration asking for houses of worship to reopen. And we were still very much in the beginning phases of the pandemic, as we all know. And that call was, it was really important. I would encourage you to go back and watch it if you didn't get a chance to tune in. Folks were really sharing their experience in pandemic, trying to, I would say, maintain a culture of worship, maintain a culture of fellowship in the midst of everything. The conversation touched on what was going on with seniors and how they were really mourning the lack of gathering. But, the ultimate consensus was that folks were not returning into their buildings. And so, now we're here a little over a year later, and, we're all slowly making the return to gathering in places of worship. And so it's a very different season. It's a very different time. And I know everybody is, on different timetables. Pastors are going about it differently. Some churches have already opened. Other churches, are slated for September. Some folks have opened, but they're, gathering outside. Some folks have opened and they're doing hybrid models online in the sanctuary. And so we're just here to talk about some of those different models and ideally have a conversation about, what you're experiencing in your own ministry context. And we have Reverend Wright here from the Black Ministerial Alliance, and we have Reverend Young here from the Massachusetts Council of Churches. And, they're sharing their experiences, they're sharing, the anecdotal evidence that they've been able to gather as they interface with pastors from the city, from all over the state. And then we also have Dr. Roberto Viau here from Tufts Medical Center to just, engage with us and give us a medical perspective on some of what folks are implementing in their congregations. And so I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Wright. I'm going to share, and I'm going to also share my screen. We have a visual support for some of the models that we're going to be talking about.
Dranzi, did we want to have a quick word of prayer before going into this?
Absolutely. Reverend Wright, will you please pray for us?
Let us pray. Gracious Father, thank you for the privilege of gathering once again as your children and as brothers and sisters in you. We ask that you'd bless this time together. Let it be profitable. Help us to think perhaps differently about how we should be going about reopening our sanctuaries. Bless that questions get answered, that new ideas are formed, and that this is a productive time. We ask this, Jesus, in your precious name. Amen.
Amen.
So what I'm going to present, as Ms. Dranzi brings it up on the screen, are 4 models. There's no magic to them. They're actually aggregations of data on what some churches are doing as they're looking at reopening. So just think of these as discussion points, as thought points, rather than these are the hardcore models and you have to fit your church into one of these models, because that's just not it. And though we will be talking about best practices, I am not in any way, shape, or form trying to say that these models that I'm presenting are best practices. These are just what some of our churches are doing. So, Dranzi, if you could go to the next screen, please. So this is model 1. The church size is 3,000 to 4,000 on a Sunday morning. So this is a large church. What this pastor and his leadership team has decided to do, they're going to do in-person, which is inside the sanctuary worship. They're going to continue their online worship. The way he has it set up, the left side of his church, left side of the sanctuary, people will be social distanced and wearing masks. On the right side of the church, people can sit in clusters or in groups as they're coming in. So there is social distancing, but it's more in a group or cluster fashion. They will be wearing masks on that side too. There's no corporate singing. There's no fellowship after service. There's no gathering. There's no meal. There's nothing like that. There's no on-site ministry other than food distribution, which I believe at this church happens once a month. Again, everyone is masked, and no children under 12 are allowed because they can't be vaccinated and they don't want to risk infecting children or children infecting others. So, Dronzi, if you could go to the next slide, please. This is model 2. This is a smaller church, fairly small church. It's 20 to 30 members. They have returned to in-person worship. They are inside the sanctuary, but again, they're continuing their online live stream. Again, there's no corporate singing. They don't have a choir or a praise and worship team. So there is corporate singing. They don't have a praise and worship team or a choir. There's no fellowship after service. Again, no on-site ministry. In this church, because it's a smaller church, they're not wearing masks because everyone is vaccinated. And they can confirm that because the group is so small. There are no children under 12. If we could go on to the next model, please. This is model 3. This is a larger church than the last one. It's 90 to about 110. Again, they're continuing their online worship. They are meeting in person, and they are doing their worship service outside of the building. They're doing their worship in the parking lot. There is no corporate singing. There is no fellowship after service, no on-site ministry, but they're also not wearing masks. And in this case, I thought we were changing this. Was it the number 4 we changed, Geronzi? Okay, so in this case, there's still no children in attendance because they can't be vaccinated. And the final model that we're seeing, or that I've been seeing, again, in-person worship inside the sanctuary, they're continuing their online worship. Again, no corporate singing, no fellowship, no on-site ministry other than food distribution program. Masks are encouraged, but not required. And again, this is a smaller church. This is 30 to 40. And again, and in this case, there are children under 12 who are allowed to come to worship service. And so where I formed these models from, I have meetings with pastors on Tuesdays. There's a 10 o'clock meeting and a 6 o'clock meeting. And I've just aggregated what a lot of them have been talking about, how they're reopening their sanctuaries to form these models. So I didn't pull these out of the air. These are based on things that pastors have actually told me. The other thing I'll add before I leave it to turn it over to Pastor Ken is that these are just the churches that have opened. There are a number of churches that are not planning to open until the fall. Some are planning on September, and some are planning to revisit the discussion in September because they want to see what happens in the summer. The Delta variant is out there, and people are afraid of opening and then having to close again because there's another spike in infections. So people are all over the map, and I present these again just as an opportunity to generate discussion and so that people can see what other churches are doing. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Kenneth Young to take it from here. You're on mute, sir.
Thank you, Reverend Wright, and thank you, Ms. Geronzi, for this opportunity to share. We are so excited to have Dr. Viau with us from Tufts Medical Center. And I just want to just open it up and just hear from Dr. Viau. You seen the models beforehand, and you just heard Reverend Wright go through them. When we look at the first, which I would say, I think the first question is, which model is the best and the safest for people to do if they're looking to open up and do worship?
I'll start by congratulating everyone for putting this together. You know, it seems like safety is a big issue, and you know, all four models, I think they've taken safety into account in a very important way. I am by no means the owner of the truth, and I'm going to go through some of the things that I think are less and more risky, but this is not written in stone, and you know, there can be some variation. And you can probably have some combination of different things. So just, generally speaking, the church that is doing the least risky part, I will say, is the church that is still meeting outdoors. I will even say that in that church, they can resume congregate singing as long as the people on the choir are vaccinated and they agree that they're going to take a risk onto themselves. Because, congregate singing, they're going to be singing closely together, but I will expect that there's going to be some distance from the rest of the attendees. Though on the other hand, being outdoors, the risk of transmission is pretty low. And I will say in that case, children under 12 should be allowed. I wouldn't see any reason why not. As long as everything takes place outdoors.
Okay.
Now, if we have to go to the indoor models, and of course the weather is not going to be this nice for the rest of the year, then I think vaccination it's something very important. And one of the things that it's mentioned is disclosure versus non-disclosure of vaccination. I am not sure how reliable can you expect the attendance to be on their vaccination status. I assume that you get higher rates of truth than what I will get if I just ask people anywhere. But it's you only need one person to do what they think it's an innocent lie and have a major problem. So it's I guess I'm not sure what's the best way there. But if you can, especially the small congregation where they can have some sort of guarantee that everyone is vaccinated, I think that's a relatively safe model. And I still have my idea that people should keep wearing masks as long as possible, particularly with the Delta variant coming. So I will say maybe perhaps the person who's talking right now can take their mask off, so they can see their facial features and have a better human interaction, but try to keep masks on as much as possible. Perfect doesn't need to be perfect. We have to make something workable. Then, corporate singing, I will say if it's 20 to 30 people, how big can be the choir, and if they're all vaccinated, it is a more risky activity because it's indoors. But if those 20, 30 people are young, are vaccinated, and have no major risk factors for complications, then why not? I think singing in that situation may be relatively safe. The larger church, it's the one that worries me the most, particularly in the sense that they're going to be in an enclosed region. I'm not entirely sure how separate you can say that one side is from the other, and I think that will depend a lot on the air circulation system they have. With this size of a church, I imagine they have some sort of HVAC and perhaps even the possibility of installing HEPA filters. And if that's the case, it can be made pretty safe. But the details are going to be on the ventilation system they have, and not as much as whether they keep people on the left or the right side.
So I have a few questions, and then we're going to open it up to the folks who are here. My particular denomination and faith background happens to be Baptist. And one of the issues that we ran into was trying to figure out how to do baptism. We ended up doing it outside, and we were not sure how safe it was, but it was outside. I had on a mask, and the person, of course, that went into the water didn't. Is that the safest way to do baptism?
I will say so. I mean, if any outdoor activities are relatively safe, I'm not sure how close you get to the person who's being baptized, and how close are the other members of the church. Now, if it's only you and the person who's getting baptized going into water, and if it doesn't involve that the person is going to be coughing after getting immersed in water, which I doubt that goes anything close to choking, if it's just a quick dip on the water, it should be perfectly fine and safe.
Okay, that's good to know. Any other questions before we move on? And you can drop those questions if you want to ask in the chat. Okay, well, I have a lot of other questions that people have asked, and I just didn't want to monopolize the time. But I will ask, because this question did come up. You talked about it's safest to be outside. And, you know, I've personally spoken with another Dr. Regina LaRock at MGH, and that's what she told us. But as you said, after a while, we know that the weather is not going to cooperate with us, and we're going to have to move inside our buildings. Can you speak more about HVAC and the HEPA filters? Because some of our churches may not have, I guess, great ventilation systems. Some of us are probably in some historic buildings. I know that I am in a historic building. And when it gets colder, you can't open the window to let in fresh air. So,
yeah, so you know, I'm not really an expert in HVAC ventilation systems. I can tell you that, you know, there are basically two ways to make an indoor airspace safe, and one is by just increasing the exhaust, like having more air exchanges per minute, and you can achieve that by placing gigantic fans on your windows. That, of course, in the winter is useless because you'll be pumping the cold air into your congregation. So it's just going to make it as cold as it is outside. HVAC systems can be configured to have special filters, and those filters can filter viral particles. Now, the main problem, what I understand with those filters, is that it's not your usual HVAC system. You need a more powerful motor to be able to pump the air through the HEPA filter. It's not that you just exchange your regular filters with a HEPA filter. Now, of the regular filters that you have, there is varying quality of them, and if you use the higher qualities, you may be able to achieve some improvement. There are also some filters that are electrostatic, and electrostatic filters are better than non-electrostatic filters.
Okay. And with that being said, okay, this is a good question. Reverend Wright said, do ultralight methods work?
If what works?
Ultraviolet light methods work.
No, so ultralight violet will help disinfect once people leave. You cannot keep ultraviolet light while people are in, and the transmission of COVID happens when people are disseminating the virus through the respiratory system. So it's not going to be helpful. You can say that instead of having people wiping out after service, you can just place gigantic ultraviolet lights. It's probably going to be more cost effective and effective to wipe down.
I'm wondering if you could speak a bit more, or if we all could speak a bit more about the inclusion of children under 12. You know, personally, my church has children in attendance under 12. And so, you know, speak about the risks of including them in the in-person, in the building service. Okay,
so of course they cannot be vaccinated, so that's a major problem. The good thing is that small children, particularly under 5 or 6, do not cough or do not have enough strength on their lungs to spread the disease too far. So the smaller children, even if they happen to be ill, as long as they're not having any active symptoms, like, you know, they're not coughing or they're not looking ill, they are very unlikely to spread the illness if they happen to go to the church. Once they're 8 or so, their lungs pretty much work the same as an adult lung, so they'll have the same strength to generate an aerosol that can disseminate through a fairly big distance. So, you know, I will say if all of the child's contact are vaccinated, and well, of course, the child will go to school where he's going to be in contact with his non-vaccinated peers, which is a problem. But if you can say that all of his adult contacts are vaccinated and they don't have any symptoms, you can say that the risk is decreased. You have to get very honest about the symptoms, and you have a little sore throat, maybe you should not come to church, even though if you're feeling fine, it's just a tiny sore throat, it's going to go away. Well, maybe yes, but you don't want to put everyone at risk because of your little sore throat, which actually that's the way that we've been seeing a lot of infections in the young, like a little bit sore throat and they feel nothing and they happen to be positive. But I mean, I will say that the younger kids, they are probably okay to go.
So there have been questions about music and choirs, and you kind of talked about it a little bit. Historically, our churches, Black churches in particular, loves singing and loves big choirs. Can you speak to that? I mean, if they are all vaccinated, is it okay to have what size choir?
Well, so I won't be able to say the size of the choir because it just goes like one person is less risky than 2 person, then 3, then 4. It just goes the way up as the more people that you get there. So the main problem with people singing and people really singing as you guys do, and not like any pop star, like real singing, is that whenever you make those movements in your throat, you're able to expel a lot of little particles at an amazing speed. That's why it sounds so beautiful, because that's why you need to move your vocal cords in the way that causes those beautiful sounds. So that risks a lot of aerosolization, and those particles can go very far away from the people who are singing. So I will say that if you have a small choir that it's like in an outdoor setting and they're close together, the risk is going to be among themselves, because the air is not going to be able to transmit that aerosolized particles into the rest of the congregation. But if you have those people in an indoor setting, it's really very hard to say that you're going to be able to isolate the aerosolization from everyone else. And right now that we're looking at the Delta variant spiking up, I will start presuming that we're going to have a lot of asymptomatic infections in people that were vaccinated. And especially if you have people on the congregation that are either not vaccinated or that for some reason cannot respond to the vaccine, people who have immunocompromising conditions like as simple as diabetes, but there are people who have lung transplants, kidney transplants, they'll be placed at a very high risk.
Okay, thank you. And we do have another question, but this Delta variant keeps coming up, and I don't want to act as if we are all medical experts and understand what that actually means. So can you explain this Delta variant and why people are testing positive, or is it more can people attract the virus more because of this variant?
Before I forget, I just saw a question from Reverend Wright on the chat. Mm-hmm. About temperature taken. I don't think it's worthwhile to take temperatures. It's not very precise, and most people who get the infection get the fever one day, and by the time they will go somewhere, they're not having a fever and they're still contagious. So I overall think that taking temperatures is a waste of time. And now going back to the Delta variant. So the virus works by attaching to the spike protein, uses the spike protein to attach to a receptor on the cell. And how good that attachment happens depends on the microscopic shape of this spike protein. So the Delta variant has the spike protein that is much more sticky than one of the original variants. And it's about 3 to 4 times more sticky, more contagious than the original variant, and that also makes it more likely to escape from the effects of the vaccine.
So, thank you. So, what is that? I mean, my wife is on, And she knows this stuff, and I'm so grateful. And then I say, okay, now tell me what that really means. So, so what does that really mean for us? We've, I believe most of us who are on here have taken probably one shot or at least both and fully vaccinated. And so now we, according to what we're seeing in the media, we kind of have this pass, right? We go to the grocery store, we no longer have to wear the mask. We can go outside, we no longer have to wear the mask. But we keep hearing about this Delta variant. And so if it is, more sticky, as you said, should we begin to think about, continuing to wear the mask or some type of face shield, especially if we're going to go into the church?
I think so. I think that the CDC's recommendation of getting rid of the mask was a little bit politically motivated. I think that wearing the mask is still something that I would advise, particularly because it's not such a burdensome intervention. Of course, if someone is really having physical issues with the mask, then it might be safe to have just one or a couple of persons not wearing the mask. But personally, I keep wearing the mask. If I go out, I wear the mask. Even if I'm going to be outdoors, I will be wearing the mask. I may be a little bit more nervous than other people. I'm not sure why, but yeah, just to give you an example, the original strain of COVID, if you were to get one person who has COVID and put it in a group of people, you will expect that person to infect about 2 other persons. If you were get someone with the Delta variant and you put them on the same group of people, you can expect to have 6 to 8 people who will get infected.
Wow.
So, it is that more contagious. And the vaccines are still providing a lot of effectivity in the sense that it still has a reasonable protection against getting infected. And it still has a great protection against developing a critical illness. If you're vaccinated, the most likely is you won't end up in the hospital. You will not end up in the ICU, which is great. But it also has the disadvantage that now you become a risk to the people who are not vaccinated.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
David, I was looking at that. I looked at your models. I'm not sure, are any of the churches allowing their full capacity of members to come to church, or have any of them reduced their capacity? Because we're hearing a lot about registration. Some churches are doing registration. We're setting up our system to do that, but I was wondering what everyone else was doing.
The truth is that people haven't had to deal with the issue of full capacity because a lot of people are not coming back yet. That is a question that they will have to deal with, I think, in the future. But right now, you're looking at attendances that are from 10% to, I think, at most 30%. So that
We got about 50% who want to come back. We did a survey.
Well, so about those surveys, people are happy to come back until they actually have to get up on Sunday morning, get dressed, and come to church. You'll see that number shrink back. But even at 50%, you can perhaps work with that depending on your spaces. But that has not been a problem in the churches that have started to opening. A lot of them are trying to figure out how to get more people to come back.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Outside of the city, I will say that there are churches who are hosting, some very few who have opened their doors to, everybody, because there's no state, ruling of directives saying, whether or not you need to have a certain amount of people. At one point, I guess it was like 50% and, 35% and 30, but yes. And I think the thing that they're saying is that everybody has to wear a mask. And we have Dr. Viau here now. So I think that's the question that we should ask him. Even if we have a full capacity, people are sitting right next to each other. Is it safe if they have on a mask?
Well, if they're vaccinated, I will say yes. If they're not,
we don't know whether they're vaccinated or not.
Yeah, I will be worried if you can be assured that you at least have a 70% vaccination in the people that are getting together, then it's probably going to be safe with the mask. If you cannot assure that it's a 70% vaccination rate, I will be worried about having people close together, even with the mask.
And so you would still suggest that we do 6 feet or 3 feet distance?
Well, I mean, 12 feet is it's safer than 6, that it's safer than 3, that it's safer than 1. So, I cannot give you a specific number. If 6 feet is the definition of an exposure by the CDC, if you're closer than 6 feet. So I guess that's the threshold that the CDC decided was for safety. Initially, 3 feet is less safe, but breathing on your breath, it's very unsafe.
Okay. And the reason why I ask is because the schools were saying that they only, they're doing 3 feet. So that's the question that we get from some people. It's like, well, my kids are going to school, and the school system is saying 3 feet, and then you go into the church, you're saying 6 feet. So which one are we supposed to do? And I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that we're having as far as messaging, right?
Yeah, and part of the public health thing is that you end up making decisions for others. Like, how safe is safe? How safe do you want to be? When I give you a recommendation of 6 feet, what is your safety threshold? Do you want to have 0 infections? Maybe you should do 12 feet or not meet at all. Are you okay with a couple of infections? Maybe 6 feet. Are you okay with a handful? Maybe 3. And I guess part of the risk calculation with children is that since they are young and we haven't seen so much mortality on the young people, that perhaps tolerating more cases of COVID in people that are not going to get severely ill is more acceptable.
And with that being said, too, with the choir singing, we know that you said, it's probably a terrible idea to do it. But with they're wearing masks, they're fully vaccinated, but they're wearing masks and they're singing in the choir.
I don't think that the mask is capable of stopping the force of the air that gets expelled while someone is singing.
Okay.
The velocity of the air of someone singing is really impressive, and it's a beautiful thing. Our vocal cords and the sounds that we can produce while singing. But it's a very good aerosolizing mechanism.
And you would say the same thing for preaching?
I guess yes, but the thing with preaching is that it's only one person. So, and I think that the pastor can be more trusted to say if he's having any symptoms. And, I will say that if pastor is having a sore throat or had a sore throat yesterday, he should not preach. Even if it's possible, if before Sunday morning, get a COVID test and preach if your COVID test is negative that Sunday.
Okay. And the reason why I ask is because, again, some of us are in small churches and historic churches, and they're not able to move any chairs or pews or anything like that to kind of do distancing. They're going to have to ask people to adhere to the distancing, as well as people who are in the pulpit. And so I think we have to think through those things, whether we just say, you know what, we're not going to have anyone on the roster at all, or just have a pastor alone, because the spacing is just not there in a lot of our churches.
So, I have no idea what's the cost and what will be the price of this, but the antigen tests that are being sold at CVS, I don't remember how much they cost. I think they're like $20, $25 each. They can be self-applied. I think that if someone is negative on that day, and it's reasonable for them to sing and to preach and to have full participation.
Okay.
But I have no idea if it's going to be cost forbidding or not. And if there's a way that perhaps as congregation, as an association, you can go with Abbott or whoever's making the assays and get them at a better price. they're not expensive to make.
Okay. Any other questions for Dr. Viau?
I had a comment, I guess, to share regarding Ms. Vicky's question about registration. Are you still there? And you just took off your camera? All right. Yeah. So.
All right. So my family just came in the room, so I didn't want to. Go ahead.
Completely understand. I just want to make sure you heard what I was saying. So I was gonna share that my church, my pastor's actually on the call. When you asked that question, I was like, Pastor Shelley, do you want to share about what we're doing? But basically, when folks enter the sanctuary, they scan a QR code. And that is like what we're doing for contact tracing. And I think it's probably a bit more accurate than if you're asking people to register to come to service beforehand. Because, you know, Reverend Wright is saying sometimes folks show up, sometimes things happen. And so if you're doing that registration prior, then, you know, you might not have accurate numbers. But having folks scan a code prior to entering the sanctuary or having some way to log attendance, like at the door, in a digital way is the best way, because then you don't have to worry about pins and all of that stuff. It's just their phone and they're scanning. It's been working really well for us. We're a much smaller church than Morning Star, but I will say that you know, I could see that working for y'all. And then, you know, I say, you know, not betting that you're not going to have full capacity, but it is likely that you'll, you know, once you reopen, you're not going to see, you know, like everybody flooding the doors. You know, people tend to sit back and watch how things go, and then, you know, come in slowly. And so that could be a way to balance it, like, you know, having those pre-registration polls or asking people would they come in, and then being able to measure that with something that you're taking on site to say, how are the numbers adding up?
And that's similar to what we've been doing. We've been doing pre-registration, even if you're serving that day, and then we take attendance. The barcodes, like we're starting to implement that. Not everyone is as tech savvy as we would love. We just opened it up to our senior, our seasoned saints. Some of them can register. Some of them are calling, or they're calling like the main person that deals with the senior ministry. And I'm adding them on. And even they came out in, like, I want to say maybe 30 of them came out the first week.
That's awesome.
But then last week there were 3 of them. So it's true what you said, David, that once they, you know, they get outside, they can come back. And then even the seniors, who are our most vaccinated group, they were all there, and then, you know, then they started to build up. But there are the same ones who keep coming back. It's the same ones. So I guess we're just gonna do the same. But that's what we're doing. We're doing pre-registration, a link every week. I send it out. We're getting used to, you know, we're testing out who's in the check-in to do the barcodes and QR codes and do all that stuff. So we're getting there. It's just, I said to our deacon chair, and I said, I feel like we're the parents who aren't letting their kids come outside to play, because I wasn't sure what everyone else was doing. And then I saw the link for this meeting. So I'm glad to see that we're kind of on the right track. So I appreciate y'all, really.
I'm not sure if I can speak now at this time. If everyone can hear me, my name is Pastor Shelley. I'm Joanne's pastor. I miss some of what she said. Again, we do have the barcode and the registration that we have for people. They can do it before church, even the day before, if need be, or before they come in. You know, we're not restricted as far as we know, as far as numbers go, but it seems like COVID has done that for us, for all churches, you know, put on some restriction. It's amazing to see the numbers how they've dropped around most churches. And a lot of it has to do with fear, that there's folks who are either haven't had the vaccine and are fearful to go out, or those who have had it, and because of their medical conditions or the fact that they consider themselves elderly, they are just fearful and extremely cautious about going into a setting that they're not familiar with, or that is outside of their bubble, of the bubble of their family and those people who they're around all the time. We're prayerful, and like anything in this world, we walk by faith and believe that the same God that got us through the pandemic and created the vaccine will also keep us safe in the church setting and in the building. He hasn't changed. He's just as capable. So we try to pass that message on to our members who may not be coming because of those reasons that were created. But we try to go forward and make sure that we take the necessary steps to be safe. As much as possible, we wear masks. We do have younger children who are not vaccinated, but we don't try to congregate, or fellowship unless we're in safe settings. And we try to go through the service and have the service and then close everything out and move everybody on. So again, we try to take the necessary steps to keep people safe, and make sure that as much as possible, we keep ourselves masked as well.
Thank you. How are all of you handling people who shout?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm that person who get the Holy Ghost and they can't control it. And I mean, I'm just wondering right now, we're lucky that we have about 2 that will get that way. And then out of the 150 that we have, 100 that we have in the building right now, any thoughts on handling that?
I think that clearly the spirit is subject to the prophet, which means God knows, the spirit knows what's going on for everyone. I really do believe that he will allow you to control it if you want to control it. But if not, I think that there needs to be steps taken to make sure that people stay safe, because with some people who shout, they go all over and all out, and they're almost unconscious of who they're around or what they're doing and how they're doing it. So I think that, again, you need to take precautions, at least on my end. The doctor can speak more to that.
I mean, I agree with you. There's no way that we're going to have 100% safety on something. And, as someone who, I'm talking here in the position of a scientist and so my position is going to be, I cannot guarantee 100% safety on anything, but, there's a difference of that gap of that 100% safety has to be covered by God. And, and you'll take all the precautions that you can, but you have to trust a higher being. And
Well, Dr. Viau, I got a lot of faith in the Lord, and I really do. I trust him with all my heart. But I, as one of the older members at my church said, he gave you 5 senses, so use one of them. And one of them is I want to make sure that I'm listening, and I believe God uses science to help us and to heal us. And so in that aspect, if there is someone who is uncontrollably shouting, it has happened. We had service last Sunday and someone was shouting, and that was fine. We were outside. They stayed to themselves, right? Nobody went over there to try to, calm them down or cool them off or get them a cup of water. But if this is happening inside, do we do the same thing? Let them stay to themselves, and hopefully the higher being, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost, whatever we want to, how we would like to name or articulate the Spirit, we'll keep them safe.
Well, I mean, to keep them safe, I will say to encourage, if you know that someone is likely to start yelling encourage them to get vaccinated. If they haven't been, and if they have been vaccinated, then I will it has a certain degree of risk that I will not be terribly worried. As long as they don't have any symptoms, I think everyone has to encourage, your family or any time that you're going to be meeting with everyone, that if you have symptoms, you should be able to say, well, I had a sore throat, I'm not going to come today. and to have this a mechanism where the person doesn't feel guilty for not being able to participate, even if they have the slightest doubt that we're not feeling well.
And so I will say, you know, some of us have probably gone through this, you know, long process of getting folks in. You know, once you come in, you need to, you know, squirt the hand sanitizer. We got hand sanitizers in stations all across the sanctuary. You know, is that something that we ought to continue to promote? Like when they come in, they need to do hand sanitizer, no shaking hands, no hugging. Is that something that you think would, you know, make sure that when we allow people in, however many folks we get in to the building, that's something we should continue to, like the no fellowship and things of that nature inside the building? When I say fellowship, I mean no gatherings inside the building.
Well, I mean, how can I tell someone not to give a hug?
No, we want, well,
yeah,
I do. I tell people, don't give a hug if you think you don't, you know, I ask people, are you hugging? Because some people don't feel comfortable.
Well, I know, but you know, as a human being, I cannot say you're not hugging everyone else for safety. You know, if you're gonna hug, you're gonna hug. Right. And hugging doesn't mean that you'll be breathing on that person. So I will say hug. Shake your hands. I mean, use a hand sanitizer afterwards because, you know, people are always touching their faces. But, you know, I think it's safe to have a moment where you can hug and shake hands and just be aware that immediately after that shaking hands, that being physical with each other, you're going to drop some hand sanitizer.
Okay.
Doctor, you said one thing that makes sense to me, and I really think that wisdom is an important factor in everything that we do, certainly when it comes to church and when it comes to what we're dealing with now, being this pandemic. And I think that, you know, taking precautions makes sense. You know, we make sure that we try to do that. If one of the things that concerns me that you talked about that I think is important for all of us to think about is when someone comes in or may come in and have symptoms of a cold or symptoms of what COVID is, especially with the variant being what it is. First of all, that person shouldn't come to the building, but we know that sometimes they do. And I think that, you know, it sounds like you're saying take steps that if someone is trying to come into the building under those conditions, then we need to be careful of whether or not we allow that to happen. I think that's what you're saying, Doctor.
Yeah, you know, if there's any way that you can prevent people from coming in with any symptom, and you know, right now at the hospital we have to fill out a questionnaire where we have to certify that we don't have any symptoms, and we have to go through all of the symptoms every day. And you know, it's an app on the phone that does that. In a way, for us, it's more of like a legal way to say that we're not going to bring stuff into our workplace. But any way that you can make sure that to bring attention to the people that are coming of what are the symptoms and making them think, no, I really have this. I should not step in. And you know, people go to church because they want fellowship, because they want to feel part of something, and perhaps there's a way that those persons can get some extra attention after service by an electronic mean, you know, or perhaps if you can offer on-site COVID testing and say, well, you know, you can come, you get your COVID test here, and if you're positive, then we'll do everything electronically for you. If you're negative, you'll be welcomed.
I think that, I'm sorry, Ronzi, you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to backtrack just a bit to Miss Vicky's question about shouting, and I pretty much agree with all the comments that followed it. And you know, Reverend Wright said something about being prayerful and careful, and also just anticipating these things. And so I think that we have, you know, we have kind of you know, like set procedures in place for when someone shouts. You know, the ushers come, the deacons come, they got the white cloths, they cover them, they bring them to, you know, the aisle, and, you know, they make sure they're safe. And so I think that the same type of thinking needs to happen, like right now in this moment. What are we doing, you know, in the event that these things happen that take COVID and take safety into account? And then I also think that now is the time to kind of like demystify some of these practices for parishioners, and also let people in the church know, hey, these are the risks involved in, you know, this type of behavior, or catching the Holy Spirit, or doing it this way. You know, if you feel so inclined, here's a special place for you. Or, you know, let people know that when somebody's around you doing X, Y, Z, that maybe, you know, you give them more space, or, you know, we kind of like anticipate these things, and we make new procedures along the way, and then we, you know, document it and we share it. Like, this is what ideally this kind of whole conversation is in the direction of. It's just talking about this new place that we are all in, and, you know, trying to understand all of, you know, kind of the issues that come along with it. I'll say on Sunday, a visitor came to our church, and we, in our conversations about, you know, even kind of like having this conversation, we're like, oh my gosh, how do you address all of the things that can come up? And he didn't have a mask, and he didn't want to put one on. And he said, I have faith, I don't need a mask. And, you know, he wasn't admitted into our worship service. And, you know, it's like, that's a completely, you know, that's something, you know, you don't hear of. Like, how can you not admit, you know, when will we think of not admitting a visitor to worship? But it's like, now is, you know, a different time, and it's a different season. And I think that that's true for everything that we've been doing. We have to think about it differently, and, you know, understand how to do it differently. And I think that, so that's what I was thinking when you're talking about shouting. That's what I'm thinking when we're talking about, you know, anything that has been previously. We have to kind of assess all of our practices and be very intentional about how we're moving forward with them, or we're removing them, you know, or how we're modifying them. And so, you know, communion, you know, we do communion. Now we're doing the pre-packaged cups and wafer. Before, we used to have, you know, we used to hand pour the grape juice, right, Pastor Shelley? And so
this is true, we did. Again, one of the things that I spoke about on Sunday, my topic was transition of the new normal. And as Joanzi is saying, this is a new normal for the church, and shouting and everything else that takes place that could create a problem for anyone in regards to this virus needs to be pre-planned. You know, my thing, if somebody, we haven't had anybody shouting in the church in a while. You know, I think Pastor Audrey did once or twice. But the bottom line is that if that happened, we would have protocol in place. And my thing is, people who are vaccinated with mask on would just be there to make sure that he or she didn't hurt themselves or somebody else.
I'm thinking of things right now to bring back to our nurses.
Amen.
So thank you.
So Dr. Viau, I know, you know, we almost, you know, done with our time, but I do want to talk about communion. We talked about baptism, and, you know, in most of our churches, these are the two holy ordinances, baptism and communion. And as Sister Geronzi said, I'm sorry, Miss Geronzi, as she said,
I can be a sister, it's cool.
we do it differently. And so what do we do if we have a church that's full and we're asking them to take off their mask, to take part of the bread and the cup, and then, you know, are we asking them to, how they're discarding it? You know, should there be baskets that they just place it in as they leave out of worship? Because normally we will pass baskets around. So we can't, you know, those are touches, and you already ask people to put something in their mouth twice. And so I don't know. I mean, is there any best practices on partaking communion? And we have other people that are part of our council, they're still doing, the priest or the father is giving them the cup, and there's an intention, where they're dipping the wafer and then partaking of it. Can you give us some best practices when it comes to that?
So there's no transmission from oral intake of COVID. So the main danger we were talking about is if I get something that for some reason is, I'm touching my infected face, I get my noses, then I touch the basket, and then I take the bread, I give it to the next person. The next person will take the basket with their hands, and then that person's going to take the bread. If they just take the bread and eat the bread, it's not a problem. But if then they go in and go to their noses, then they're going to be inoculating themselves with the virus. So that is the main issue from passing something around. It's not as much as you're eating it, but that you're placing things closer to your respiratory system. So again, ideally, if you're passing a basket, then you have a prepackaged wafers, and the person can take their package of wafers and pass the basket, and then use hand sanitizer, open up their package, eat their wafer, and then clean up their hands. I will say that will be the safest approach. But as long as people are very conscious that they should treat their hands as a big no to their face after they touch the basket and before they do hand sanitation, I will say that's a relatively safe practice.
So, and another question will be, if they have the prepackaged and we've given it to them, they partake of the bread and the cup, should we just ask them to hold on to that and then discard it on their way out? So there's no passing of the basket.
Yeah, that would be the ideal thing. Yeah, to discard on the way out, and yeah.
Okay.
I can say, like, what we've done, we have a communion tray before they go into the sanctuary. After they sanitize and checked in, they can pick up their prepackaged. And then, because we're still social distancing and we're not at capacity, once we've taken communion, the ushers go around with baskets, and then people can throw them in the trash baskets. Because, if we let them hold on to them, it's going to end up under the pew and all that. So the ushers will try and go to everyone they can reach without being too invasive, and they'll throw them in the trash basket, and then there'll be baskets at the end. So that's what we've been doing for the past year. So
butterfly nets.
I was going to answer the question on the chat from Reverend Wright. Shorter services. I think that once depending on how involved the service is, if you have a service where people are relatively distanced from each other and it's like a big congregation, I will say a shorter service is better than a longer service. Once you get a very close service, like if you're telling us 30 persons on a service, I think that there's a limit. Like maybe once the service is like 20 to 30 minutes long, making it any longer probably doesn't add significantly to the risk.
Well, I don't have, are there any more questions that anyone would like to ask? Dr. Viau, do you have any final words for us?
Well, I'm really impressed about all the efforts you're making to keep your churches safe, and it is a sad position we're on with the virus and what's been our overall response and what's happening everywhere. But I really wish that we can get through this and that churches do not suffer from loss of people and from the loss of the activities that we love. I will be very happy to learn that this is over and that people are doing congregate singing and that everyone is doing fellowship and ministry and that we are all back to what we like to do.
Amen. Geronzi?
Thank you everyone for joining.